The houses in Willow Creek looked almost the same. White fences lined up in neat rows, lawns cut to the exact inch, and flower beds that felt more like trophies than nature. On the surface, it was the kind of neighborhood people dreamed about. Quiet, orderly, safe. But beneath the manicured grass and painted smiles, there was a pressure that never seemed to let up. Rules weren't just rules here. They were the air people breathed, and breaking even the smallest one was treated like a crime. It was late summer when things started to shift. The evenings were still heavy with heat, the kind that made the air buzz, and neighbors lingered outside a little longer than usual. On those evenings you could hear snippets of gossip carried across driveways. The whispers were often about who left their trash bins out too long, whose weeds were creeping past the property line, or who dared to park on the street overnight. Small things, but in Willow Creek, small things had a way of becoming battles. The Homeowners Association was the force behind it all. To outsiders, it was just a group of volunteers keeping the neighborhood nice. To those who lived under its shadow, it was more like a quiet regime. Letters slipped into mailboxes with words like violation and final warning had a way of sinking into your chest like stones. No one wanted to be on the wrong side of it. Everyone knew the board members by name, but most kept their heads down, trying not to draw attention. Among the residents was a couple who had moved into one of the corner houses a year earlier. They seemed like any other family, paid their dues, kept the yard neat, waved politely at neighbors without getting too close. The husband, Marcus, was tall, quiet, and spent most evenings fixing things in the garage. His wife, Claire, carried herself with the kind of calm strength that made people either respect her or feel uneasy around her. She never joined in with the idle gossip, never lingered too long at block parties, but her presence didn't go unnoticed. The neighbors didn't know much about them. They didn't know about Claire's long days, the hours she spent dealing with people at their worst, the decisions she had to make that weighed on her even at home. They didn't know the authority she carried outside those neighborhood streets, authority that came not from clipped hedges or HOA meetings, but from a badge that held real power. All they saw was another woman walking her dog, another couple pulling weeds from their flower bed. But even in this quiet house, tension had been building. Marcus often said the HOA was watching too closely, that they were itching to find a reason to put pressure on them. At first, Claire brushed it off as paranoia. She had seen real power abused in real ways, and a few cranky letters about trash bins or parking didn't compare. But Marcus wasn't wrong. The notices had started coming more often, each one a little more pointed than the last. A missing signature on a landscaping approval, a fine for a car left in the street during a family visit, a warning about a fence that was 1 inch higher than the approved height. It was never enough to be serious, but always enough to remind them they were being watched. The thing about power is that it doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers until you're backed into a corner. The board members had their favorites, people they gave passes to, people whose violations disappeared quietly. Others weren't so lucky, and for reasons Marcus couldn't figure out, they seemed to have chosen his family as their target. Neighbors noticed the way the letters kept showing up at their house, but most kept their mouths shut. A few even enjoyed it. There was a strange comfort in watching someone else bear the weight of the rules, as if it protected them from being next. People in Willow Creek had learned to play along. They had learned not to push back. But the Harringtons, the couple on the corner, were different. They didn't bend easily, and that unsettled the people who thrived on control. The night everything began was ordinary on the surface. The streetlights hummed, the air smelled faintly of cut grass and grill smoke, and children rode their bikes in lazy loops before being called inside. Claire sat on the porch with a glass of water, staring out at the stillness of it all, while Marcus tinkered in the garage. To anyone passing by, I looked like the picture of calm. But inside, both of them felt the same thing. That thin line between order and chaos was about to snap. What neither of them knew was that the next morning, The HOA would take a step too far. They had tried fines, warnings and letters, but this time they wanted to send a message. They picked up the phone, not knowing who they were about to challenge, not knowing that the woman they were trying to intimidate was the very person sworn to uphold the law in the county. The perfect little world of Willow Creek was about to break wide open. The first cracks showed in the smallest of ways. It was a letter slipped under the door, not even mailed this time. Marcus found it early one morning when he went to grab the paper. The envelope had no name, only their house number scrawled across it in sharp ink. Inside, the words were short, cold, and to the point. Your non-compliance will not be tolerated. There was no mention of what rule they had supposedly broken, no signature from the board, nothing official, just a warning. Marcus read it over 3 times, his jaw tightening. He placed it in front of Claire at the kitchen table, where she sat in her robe, sipping coffee before another long day. She didn't react right away. She had been handed worse threats before in her line of work. But this was different. This wasn't coming from someone she arrested or someone desperate and broken. This was coming from people who mowed their lawns on Sunday mornings, who smiled at the store, who hid behind the mask of neighborhood standards. It's starting to get personal, Marcus muttered. He was right. The HOA had been escalating slowly, like a storm creeping closer. Their latest complaint claimed Marcus's truck was commercial in appearance and couldn't be parked in the driveway. It wasn't a work truck, just an old Chevy he was restoring, but the board didn't care. When he tried to appeal, the response was delayed, then denied. Neighbors began to glance at the truck like it was an eyesore, though some had far worse vehicles parked in their own driveways. It wasn't about the truck. It was about control. One evening, Marcus came home to find a note taped to the hood. Move it or lose it. His stomach dropped as he peeled the paper off the windshield. He looked around, but the street was quiet, curtains drawn. Whoever left it knew better than to be seen. The tension began seeping into their marriage. Marcus paced the house at night, his voice sharp, saying things like, "They're trying to break us down." Claire tried to steady him, but she wasn't untouched either. She felt the sting of humiliation when neighbors avoided her gaze at the mailbox or whispered in tones that weren't as hushed as they thought. She carried her badge every day into a world where she was respected, feared even. Yet here in her own neighborhood, she was reduced to a target of petty tyranny. It gnawed at her. Then came the fine. A bill arrived claiming hundreds of dollars owed for repeat violations. When Marcus asked for specifics, the list was vague. Trash cans out too long, yard lights not approved, unauthorized garden edging. The absurdity made his hands shake with rage. Claire, reading over his shoulder, kept her calm mask in place, but something burned in her eyes. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about dignity. Behind all of it was a man named Richard Lane, the HOA president. He had lived in Willow Creek for nearly 20 years and liked to remind people of it. He wasn't a large man, but he had the kind of presence that demanded attention. His voice carried at meetings, and his smirk carried everywhere else. Richard thrived on the power the HOA gave him. He wore it like armor, hiding the fact that his own business was failing, that his marriage was rotting from the inside out. No one knew the cracks in his life, because Richard knew how to bury them under rules, fines, and control over others. Richard had always disliked Marcus. He thought he was arrogant, too quiet, too unwilling to bow to the little rituals of the neighborhood. And Claire, something about her unsettled him. She didn't shrink in his presence like most did. She had a calm, sharp look that seemed to cut through him, and he hated it. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he knew she wasn't someone he could easily intimidate. That only made him push harder. At first, the rest of the board followed Richard's lead. Some were true believers in the rules. Others just liked influencing their neighbors. But as Richard's obsession grew, cracks appeared there too. One member, an older woman named Evelyn, started to question why the Harringtons were being targeted so often. "We're supposed to keep the neighborhood fair, not pick fights," she whispered after a meeting. Richard brushed her off with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The pressure mounted from all directions. Marcus's job was demanding, and the constant harassment wore him down. He snapped more easily, grew restless, and started drinking more in the evenings. Claire noticed, but she had her own battles. At the sheriff's office, crime was spiking, budgets were tight, and she carried the weight of responsibility every day. The HOA's attacks followed her home like a shadow she couldn't shake. One Saturday afternoon, things boiled over. Marcus was mowing the lawn when Richard walked up the driveway, arms crossed, lips curled into a smile. He stood at the edge of the grass and said, "You know, this doesn't meet regulation height." Marcus cut the engine and stared at him, sweat dripping down his neck. "It's grass," Marcus said flatly. "It grows." Richard chuckled, slow and deliberate. "Rules are rules. Maybe this neighborhood isn't a good fit for you." Claire, who had been inside watching through the window, came out onto the porch. She didn't say a word, just folded her arms and met Richard's gaze. He shifted slightly, but his smirk held. "Afternoon," he said, mock polite, before turning and walking away. That night, Marcus sat in the garage in silence for hours, fists clenched, the mower still sitting where he had left it. The unease spread further. Someone began leaving their trash scattered across the Harringtons' yard. Fast food bags, empty bottles, cigarette butts. I never smoked. The implication was clear. They were outsiders. They didn't belong. A few times Marcus saw figures moving near the corner late at night, but when he stepped outside, they were gone. Claire's badge gave her authority everywhere else, but here she felt stripped of it. She wanted to confront Richard, drag his arrogance into the light, but she knew it wasn't that simple. If she revealed who she was, it would feel like using her position as a weapon, and she wasn't ready to cross that line. Not yet. But Richard was getting bold. He started telling neighbors stories, twisted rumors about Marcus being unstable, about Claire being cold and unfriendly, even dangerous. People began pulling their children closer when walking past their house. The once polite waves turned into blank stares, then into silence. Every pressure point was being pushed. Marcus's frustration, Claire's restraint, Richard's hunger for control. None of them would bend, and the air around them grew sharper, heavier. Then, one evening, the line was crossed. Claire was driving home from a long shift when flashing lights appeared in her rearview mirror. Sheriff's cruisers. Her cruisers. Confused, she pulled over. The deputies approached cautiously, hands resting near their holsters. "Ma'am," one said, voice tense, "we got a call about suspicious activity matching your vehicle." Claire stared at him, realizing the setup. Someone had called the cops on her in her own county. When she stepped out and revealed her badge, the deputies froze. Embarrassment flooded their faces as they realized what had happened. Claire dismissed them calmly, but inside she was boiling. She didn't need to ask who had made that call. Richard had gone too far. From that night on, the Harringtons knew it wasn't just about fines, grass height, or trucks anymore. This was a war, and the lines had been drawn. The perfect little neighborhood of Willow Creek was no longer a place of peace. It was a battleground, and sooner or later, something had to break. The night of the breaking point was heavy with summer heat. The sky pressed down like a lid, the street lamps buzzing faintly, as if even they felt the tension in the air. Willow Creek was quiet, but not peaceful, more like a silence before thunder. Inside their house, Marcus paced, shoulders tight, eyes bloodshot from too many sleepless nights. Claire sat at the table, still in her uniform, her badge tossed carelessly beside her. She was staring into her glass of water as if it held answers, her jaw set, but her chest rising and falling faster than usual. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The phone call from earlier that day hung between them like smoke. Richard Lane had reported Marcus directly to the sheriff's office, claiming he was a threat to the neighborhood. The irony was cruel. Richard had unknowingly fed the accusation straight into Claire's department. It was humiliating, insulting, and dangerous. Claire had covered for Marcus, shut down the nonsense before it reached anyone higher up, but she knew it wouldn't stop here. Then the headlights appeared through the blinds. A slow roll of a car stops outside their house. A door slammed. Marcus stiffened. Claire pushed back her chair, rising quickly. They both knew before they even looked. Richard. He was standing on the sidewalk, clipboard in one hand, flash dessus, light in the other, like some self-appointed warden. His voice cut into the night. "You're in violation again. Unauthorized lighting on the porch." Marcus stepped out onto the lawn, fists clenched at his sides. "It's a bulb, Richard." Richard took a few steps closer, a smirk curling at the edge of his mouth. "Rules don't care what you think. If you can't respect this neighborhood, maybe you should leave before we make you." The word we lingered. It wasn't just Richard now. He had stirred enough whispers, planted enough poison. Neighbors' curtains twitched, faint glimmers of faces peeking out, watching, silent. Claire stepped forward, her voice calm but sharp. "Go home, Richard." But Richard laughed, a brittle, sharp sound that echoed down the street. "Or what? You gonna arrest me? Oh wait, you don't have that kind of power here." Something inside Marcus snapped at that. Weeks of harassment, nights of scattered trash, the humiliation of being treated like criminals in their own home. He moved fast, closing the distance between them. His voice was rough, strangled with rage. "You don't get to come onto my property again." Richard didn't back down. He leaned in, his words low but venomous. "You don't belong here, and neither does she." It happened too fast for either of them to stop. Marcus shoved Richard back, harder than he meant to. Richard stumbled, lost his balance, and fell against the curb. The crack of skull against concrete split the air, sharp and final. For a second, no one moved. The night seemed to hold its breath. Marcus froze, staring down at Richard sprawled on the ground, blood spreading dark and fast beneath his head. His chest heaved, but no sound came out. Claire dropped to her knees beside Richard, her training taking over before her mind could catch up. Her hands pressed against the wound, but she could feel it, the depth, the pulse fading. She looked up at Marcus, her face pale, her voice shaking. "He's not going to make it." Marcus staggered back, his hands trembling, his face contorted in disbelief. I didn't mean..." The neighborhood had come alive now. Doors opened, voices whispered. Footsteps shuffled closer, but not too close. Eyes everywhere, but no one moved to help. They just watched, hidden in shadows, as if the Harringtons' fall was a spectacle. Richard gasped once, shallow and wet, then went still. The silence afterward was crushing. Marcus backed toward the garage, muttering, "It was an accident. He came at me. He wouldn't stop." His words spilled out, desperate, as if saying them could make them true. Claire stood, her hands stained red, her chest rising and falling fast. For years she had lived in control of chaos, keeping order, upholding law. But no. She was standing over a dead man, her husband's trembling figure just feet away, and the line between right and wrong blurred into nothing. Panic rushed in. She could hear sirens in her head, though none had been called yet. She could see her badge, lying useless on the kitchen table, now a weight that threatened to crush her life. She glanced at Marcus, at the fear in his eyes, and in that moment, instinct battled duty. Protect her husband, or uphold the law. Marcus's voice cracked. "Claire, please. Say it was self-defense. You saw... He came at me." Her heart pounded against her ribs. She looked at Richard's still body, the blood dark against the curb. She looked at the neighbors' shadows in the windows. She looked at Marcus, the man she had promised to stand beside no matter what, and she realized there was no undoing what had just happened. The aftermath was chaos wrapped in silence. No one ran forward. No one screamed. It was as if the neighborhood itself was complicit, choosing to watch rather than act. Marcus stood rooted to the spot, shaking, whispering the same words over and over. It was an accident. It was an accident. Claire finally moved. She pulled Marcus toward the house, her grip firm, her face set in stone. Get inside. Behind them, Richard lay in the street, lifeless, the rules and power he had clung to bleeding out into the concrete. The crime was done, and nothing in Willow Creek would ever be the same. The silence after Richard's death didn't last. It never does. In a place like Willow Creek, silence is only the pause before voices sharpen and stories spread. By morning, the neighborhood was awake with whispers, each window and porch buzzing with versions of what had happened the night before. Some said Marcus attacked him unprovoked. Others insisted Richard had been the aggressor, but no one seemed to agree on the details. What they did agree on was simple. Something had shattered the perfect order of Willow Creek, and there was no putting it back together. Inside the Harrington home, the air felt suffocating. Marcus hadn't slept. He sat at the kitchen table, elbows on his knees, head in his hands, repeating the same words under his breath. It was an accident. He slipped. It wasn't supposed to happen. The phrase had become a shield, something to hold on to. But the more he said it, the less convincing it sounded, even to himself. His hands still trembled when he thought about the moment Richard's head hit the curb. The sound wouldn't leave him. Claire moved through the house like a ghost, calm on the outside, but unraveling inside. Her training told her exactly what should have happened. Call it in, secure the scene, write the report. But she hadn't done any of that. She had chosen to pull Marcus inside, to close the door, to let the night swallow the truth. Every time she looked at her badge, lying on the counter where she had dropped it days ago, it felt heavier. She wasn't just a wife now, she was an officer torn between her oath and her family. The sheriff's office couldn't ignore what happened. A dead man in the middle of the street draws attention, no matter how carefully neighbors avoid direct involvement. Deputies arrived that morning questioning everyone, but when it came to the Harringtons, the story grew murky. Neighbors admitted to hearing shouting, but none would claim to see who made the first move. Fear and loyalty to the HOA mixed with guilt and relief that Richard's reign was over. The truth was swallowed by silence and half-truths. Evelyn, the board member who had always seemed uneasy with Richard's tactics, struggled the most. She told deputies that the Harringtons had been unfairly targeted, that Richard had gone too far. But even as she spoke, she faltered. Saying it out loud meant admitting she had stayed quiet for too long. She carried that guilt on her shoulders, whispering apologies in the privacy of her own home. The HOA scrambled to rewrite its image. Publicly, they mourned Richard, painting him as a dedicated leader who had kept the community safe. Behind closed doors, the board fractured. Some blamed Marcus openly. Others hinted that Richard's obsession had brought the tragedy on himself, but no one dared admit their own role in fueling the feud. It was easier to let Marcus and Claire carry the weight. The media picked it up within days. Headlines ran with phrases like, "Neighborhood dispute turns deadly," and "HOA president dies in confrontation." Reporters swarmed Willow Creek. Cameras pointed at white fences and trimmed lawns, painting the neighborhood as both idyllic and poisonous. Marcus was portrayed as an angry man pushed too far, Claire as the mysterious wife whose profession added a layer of scandal. Whispers about her badge became questions shouted at press conferences. Was she protecting her husband? Was the sheriff's office covering for one of their own? Claire kept her face composed in public, but at home the cracks widened. She avoided mirrors. She avoided Marcus's eyes. She found herself replaying every second of that night, asking herself what she could have done differently. If she had stepped in sooner, if she had pulled Marcus back, if she had chosen duty over loyalty. Each if was carved deeper into her chest. Marcus, meanwhile, drifted between anger and despair. Some nights he argued with her, insisting she had to back him up, that it was self-defense. Another night she broke down, shaking, saying he hadn't meant to kill anyone. He felt the weight of neighbors' stares when he left the house, even for a moment. The place that was supposed to be his home had turned into a prison, each trimmed hedge and manicured lawn a reminder of the rules that had destroyed them. The community itself was split. Some quietly admitted relief that Richard was gone, that his iron grip had finally been broken. Others hardened against the Harringtons, treating them like a disease infecting their perfect neighborhood. Children were pulled away from Marcus and Claire's dog when it wandered too close. Invitations to barbecues and block parties disappeared. Where there had once been polite waves, now there was nothing but turned backs. At the sheriff's office, Claire felt the shift in the air. Co-workers she had once trusted avoided her, and conversation stopped when she entered the room. Her reputation, built over years of service, was stained by suspicion. No one said it outright, but she could feel it. They thought she had bent the rules for Marcus, that she had chosen personal loyalty over justice, and in truth, she had. That knowledge ate at her more than the stairs ever could. Richard's family added fuel to the fire. His widow, brittle with grief and bitterness, went on television, demanding justice. She called Marcus a murderer. Aaron accused Claire of corruption. Her words struck a chord with the public, and soon social media was alive with outrage. Strangers, thousands of them, judged the Harringtons without knowing a single detail of their lives. Each new headline felt like another nail in their coffin. At home, the walls closed in. Marcus stopped working in the garage, stopped mowing the lawn. The truck he had once cared for sat neglected, dust collecting where polish used to shine. Claire tried to keep the house in order, but her movements were mechanical, like she was holding everything together with thread. Nights were the worst, when the neighborhood was quiet and the memory of Richard's laugh, his fall, and the sound of his head striking the curb replayed in both of their minds. The ripple of the crime went beyond them. Evelyn stopped attending HOA meetings, weighed down by guilt. A few neighbors put up "Justice for Richard" signs in their yards, turning the streets into a daily reminder of what had been lost. Parents warned their children to stay away from the Harringtons' corner lot, as if it carried a curse. But beneath the grief, the guilt, and the anger, one truth hung heavy. Richard's death hadn't brought peace. It had only peeled back the thin layer of civility that had covered Willow Creek. Now everyone saw what had always been there: control, fear, power games played in the open. The crime hadn't destroyed the neighborhood, it had revealed it. For Marcus and Claire, there was no going back. Their lives were no longer their own. They belonged to the headlines, the whispers, the suspicions. The perfect little world of Willow Creek had swallowed them whole, and every day afterward felt like living in its shadow. The story of Willow Creek did not end the night Richard Lane hit the curb. If anything, that was only the moment when the mask slipped and the truth came into view. What followed was slower, messier, and in many ways more painful than the crime itself. The fight moved from lawns and sidewalks into courtrooms, newsrooms, and the heavy space between two people sitting at a kitchen table, knowing nothing would ever be the same again. For Marcus, the legal process was relentless. The state charged him with manslaughter. His lawyer argued self-defense, painting Richard as the aggressor, a man whose obsession with power had finally pushed too far. But even as the case unfolded, the weight of public opinion hung over every word. Some saw Marcus as a victim, a man cornered by harassment and fear. Others saw him as dangerous, unstable, and unwilling to play by the rules. Both versions lived side by side in headlines, leaving Marcus caught between guilt and justification. Claire's role complicated everything. She had been there. She had chosen not to call it in immediately. The prosecution painted that silence as protection, even corruption. For her, the trial wasn't just about Marcus. It was about her career, her reputation, and the very oath she had sworn to uphold. She stood on the witness stand and spoke carefully, her voice steady but her heart heavy. Every word she said felt like a betrayal, either of the badge she wore or the man she loved. The verdict was not simple. Marcus was found guilty, but the sentence was lighter than many expected. The jury believed it had been an accident, that Richard had been a man who provoked conflict until it broke. Yet guilty was still guilty. Marcus went to prison, leaving the house on the corner empty of his presence, the garage quiet, the truck untouched. Claire resigned from the sheriff's office not long after. Even if she had stayed, the trust was gone. Co-workers who once leaned on her now looked at her with suspicion. She left the badge behind, but not the weight of it. She carried that forever. The knowledge that she had crossed the line between law and loyalty, that she had chosen love over duty, and that the cost had been more than she could ever pay. The neighborhood itself did not recover either. Willow Creek, once a place that boasted of order and beauty, became a place known for tragedy. Reporters came and went, but the stigma lingered. Families whispered about moving. The HOA, stripped of its leader, struggled to hold itself together. Evelyn, who had once believed in fairness, stepped down quietly, unable to stomach the game anymore. The board meetings grew tense, smaller, less certain. The rules still existed, but the fear that had once enforced them was gone. Richard's widow never forgave. She turned her grief into a weapon, suing the Harringtons in civil court, speaking to cameras about the dangers of unchecked anger. To her, Marcus was a murderer and Claire an enabler, and no legal decision would ever change that. Her bitterness spread through the community like cracks in glass, reminding everyone that grief often seeks someone to blame, whether or not it heals anything. Beyond Willow Creek, the case stirred larger conversations. Commentators debated the power of homeowners' associations, the fine line between order and control. Was it worth giving neighbors such authority over one another? How much of Richard's obsession had been fueled by the system that gave him power? Politicians promised reform, though little changed in practice. Across the country, other neighborhoods whispered about the case, some with pity, others with fear. But the deepest questions weren't about laws or rules. They were about people, about how far someone will go when they feel powerless, about how quickly civility crumbles when control is threatened. Marcus had not been a violent man. Richard had not been a villain in every part of his life. Claire had not been a corrupt sheriff. Yet in the pressure cooker of Willow Creek, each of them became something they never imagined. The story left behind uneasy lessons. That power doesn't always look like money or politics. It can hide in neighborhood meetings and letters slipped under doors. That morality isn't always clear, especially when love and loyalty are at stake. That human beings, no matter how composed or ordinary they seem, carry breaking points inside them, waiting for the wrong moment to crack them open. In the end, justice was complicated. Richard was gone. Marcus lost his freedom. Claire lost her career. The neighborhood lost its peace. Everyone walked away with scars, but no one walked away whole. Was that justice? Or just the inevitable result of people playing out roles too rigid to bend until something broke? Years later, the house on the corner still stood, but it was never the same. Families moved in and out, but the story lingered. Neighbors would glance at it when they passed, remembering the night the order collapsed into violence. The lawn grew over. The paint faded, but the memory of blood on the curb remained. And maybe that was the final truth Willow Creek had to face. Perfection is fragile, rules are brittle, and behind every white fence and trimmed hedge lies the messy, unpredictable reality of human nature. No amount of order can erase the chaos we carry inside.